Well, before we start looking at different texts, one of the things I want to cover is this. I mentioned this last week. In Genesis 5:24, it says that Enoch was taken to heaven. 2 Kings 2:11, it says Elijah was taken as well. The problem with that is you get to like John 3:13, and it says that nobody has ascended, to heaven except for the Son of Man, for Jesus. All right, well, what's going on there? Is the Bible contradicting itself? It really, if you understand Hebrew, which I know you all want to learn Hebrew now, don't you? It's the top of your wish list, isn't it? I learned Hebrew and I want to forget it. But in Hebrew, what you'll see is that when the English translates, sometimes we have a very difficult time translating certain Hebrew and Greek words because there's really not an English equivalent. And so sometimes the best I've seen is sometimes it will say that when they say heaven, sometimes they mean heaven, the temple of God where God dwells. Sometimes they mean outer space where the stars are. And sometimes they just mean the sky. And so it's difficult to see which one of the three they're talking about unless you really look in context. When they say the heaven declares the glory of God and so forth in the Psalms, well, they're talking about the stars. They don't think that God was sitting on a star up there. They didn't have that belief. They knew their Old Testament where, even Jacob looks up and there's heaven right there. It's a parallel dimension, and it's just right there. He said heaven was here, and God was here, and I didn't even know it. So in all likelihood, what they mean when Enoch and Elijah was taken, it means that they did ascend into the sky, and then like Jesus does in Acts, he just disappears. Jesus did not just keep going up into outer space. It says that Jesus ascended up above, and then a cloud came, and boom, he was gone. And the disciples are all sitting there going like this, where to go? And then finally, an angel has to go, hey, what are you looking at? He's gone. Go. And he told you to go do something, so go get to it. So he's talking about that. Enoch and Elijah were taken to paradise. Okay, now this is going to kind of get into the weeds, and I apologize ahead of time for this. But here's what the Jews believed. Here's what the Bible teaches. Before Jesus died on the cross for the sins of his people, before that happened, anyone who died went to what the Hebrews called Sheol, the place of the dead. And if you look at the parable of Jesus, where he's talking about the rich man and Lazarus, you see this. Jesus is teaching. They're both in Sheol, except one's in a really bad part of Sheol and one's in a really good part of Sheol. Right? Lazarus is just as happy as could be in Abraham's bosom over at the good side of Sheol, while the rich man sit there in flames and say, hey, somebody give me some water or something, And so there are these different parts of the place of the dead, Sheol. And so before Jesus died, that's where all dead people went. Once Jesus died, Jesus tells the thief on the cross, he does not say, today you will be with me in heaven. He said, you will be with me in paradise, which is what the Hebrews called the good part of Sheol. So where did Jesus go for the 3 days he was in the tomb? He went to paradise. He went to Sheol to preach to the righteous dead, Abraham, Elijah, Enoch, all those, David, so forth, all them to go preach what had happened. And then when he ascended to heaven, he took them with him. So the good part of Sheol is closed. If you die today, you don't go to Sheol. You go to heaven with Jesus and with God. After that's if you have faith in Jesus Christ. You don't stay there now, as I've told you. When Jesus returns, you come with him. And so when Jesus returns to reign on earth, you come, you get a body that says, Paul says, you get a body like Jesus had, a glorified body. Jesus had after, when Jesus rise again, we'll talk this a little bit. There's a reason why at first people had difficulty recognizing the resurrected Jesus. Because a new body will look a little different. Thank God. Yeah, you'd hope so, right? Your glorified body is going to look different, and there's a reason for that. It doesn't age. It doesn't get sick. It doesn't. So, you got to remember that Jesus, we're not really sure how old Jesus was when he died. Luke said, we don't know that. That's a guess. That's a guess based on what?
When he died.
Why is that? Why are we guessing 33, though? There's nowhere in the scripture where it says that.
Oh, that's just a guess.
Yeah, it's a guess. Because you had to be at least 30 to speak in public. So we guess he had to be at least 30. We guess his ministry was 3 years, so we're guessing that it was 33. We don't know that for a fact. The Greek in Luke says he wasn't 50. Well, gee, thanks, Luke. Thanks for really narrowing that down for us, But we're not told how old Jesus was. We really don't know. But we do know this. Most people, the reason they put 30, the Jews put 30 as a time when you could speak up in public, is they did not think until you were a certain age you'd have anything to say anyway, worth listening to. And at 30, anybody who's worked with people in their 20s knows exactly what they're talking about. But they considered 30 to be old age because you were lucky to live to 40 at that time. I mean, Paul calls himself basically a really old man. He was probably 60. But at that day and age, with that limited medical care and all that kind of stuff, they had a better diet than we did, but they didn't have any real medical care. And so something as simple as the flu could kill you. And did. And the number one thing women died where I was, childbirth. Yeah, from childbirth. And so, and it was a harsh climate. The reason why you hear Jesus, whenever he's walking into place, and he goes, hey, why didn't you give me some oil? Why didn't you give me, well, because if you've been to Israel, I know many of you have, it's a hot, dusty place. And it was a hot, dusty place then too. And so you walk around there all the time, you're going to get dust and you're going to have sweat and you're just going to be gnarly. And so they would keep jars of oil by their door to put in your hair and get all the nastiness out and to put on your hands because they'd be all parched and cracked and all that kind of stuff. And so they would keep that there by the door. And so you would have been living like that through most of his life. And of course, Jesus spent a good part of his life swinging a hammer out in the sun. Doing that, you're going to age. But then when he has his resurrected body, no more aging. And so he's going to look a little different. And so they're kind of like, they took a minute. Mary in the garden at first thinks he's the gardener. And there's God having a sense of humor. That whole thing, a play, he thinks he's a garden, he's in the garden. What does that harken back to? Garden of Eden, right? New Adam, so forth, is what Paul says. So anyway, so Jesus has to go and die on the cross. Then he goes to Sheol and he preaches to the remnant there. And then when he ascends back to heaven, he takes their souls with him. And when we die, and we lost a sister in Christ just in the past 2 weeks, right now, where's she at? She's in heaven. No, she's in heaven. With Jesus, her soul or spirit, whatever you call it, is in heaven. And one day, she and hopefully everyone here will get a new body. Does that make sense? All right. So that's where Elijah and Enoch went. They didn't go to heaven. They went to Sheol. So that's just so you can keep that straight in your mind. Now, let's take a look at a really weird Bible verse. 2 Kings 2. 2 Kings 2. See if you think this is a little harsh. Let's see here. Well, I thought I had it, but I went right past this. So one thing about having a Bible on your phone is that it will just jump off. Well, anyway, I'll get down here and find it. Anyway, there it is. All righty. If you've read the Bible, one of the most confusing things is who takes Elijah's place as the prophet of the Lord in Israel? Elisha. It's like, Lord, you really couldn't find like somebody named Dan or somebody we could easily, distinguish from? You had to literally almost have the same name. Yeah, it's a sense of humor again. And so Elisha's walking around, and he went from there to Bethel. And while he was going up on the way, this is verse 23, going up on the way, some small boys, it says small boys, that's really a bad translation. It really means not adult, but it doesn't mean children. Came out of the city, jeered at him, saying, "Go up, you bald head. Go up, you bald head." And then he turned around when he saw them. He cursed them in the name of the Lord. And then 2 she-bears came out of the woods and tore 42 of the boys. From there on, he went to Mount Carmel. From there, he went to Samaria. Elisha's got a temper, right? He cursed these kids, and then a couple bears come along and maul these kids. Well, first of all, here's how Matt Slick over at CARM, which is a good website, Christian Apologetic Research Ministry, CARM, CARM.org. He said, why would God allow 2 bears to kill 42 young lads simply for saying Elijah was bald? Well, let's take a look. Elisha was traveling from Jericho to Bethel when a group of young men verbally accosted him. 42 is a large number of people. In other words, he's saying, that's just not a group of kids, that's a gang. It's a mob, right? So 42 is a large number of people, were probably an organized group who had gone out to challenge Elisha. Their mockery implies a malicious intent, especially when the culture of the time insisted on showing respect to your elders. Furthermore, the statement, you go up, you bald head, has cultural significance. First of all, go up is probably a reference to Elisha's predecessor, Elijah, who ascended to heaven in 2 Kings 2:11. In other words, they were stating they wanted Elisha gone too. And since Elisha had gone on to the next world, the implication is they wanted Elisha dead. And the epithet bald head was one of contempt in the East applied to a person even with a bushy head of hair. In other words, what he's saying is, what he's not going to say, and I'll try to say pleasantly, when they said go up bald head, that was a Hebrew equivalent of a cuss word. I mean, they were being nasty. You've got a gang of teenagers, screaming at the prophet of God, go die, you blankety blank. And so God says, okay, well, see what I think about that. You two bears, you hungry? And this is not so much because it's directed at Elisha. Elisha turned around and cursed them, but it says it's God who did it. We've seen this now. One of the focus points of the Old Testament is the holiness of God. And if you don't take that holiness seriously, you can end up dead. And that's not just an Old Testament thing. That's a New Testament thing. Read the book of Acts. What happens to Ananias and Sapphira when they lie to the church? God strikes them dead. And I've told you this story when I taught freshman Bible classes at Abilene Christian. And, one kid's like, I don't like the guy of the Old Testament. He's mean. I like the guy of the New Testament. I said, I think Ananias and Sapphira would disagree with you. And the kid went, who? And I said, here's our problem. We're arguing about a book only one of us has read. All right, so we've dealt with a lot of weird stuff in the Old Testament. I want to jump into the New Testament and tackle a couple things there. One of the things that you can get confused at if you're reading the Gospels, which is funny. I want to get him here. He's too expensive right now. We've got to wait for his rates to drop. But there's an African-American Christian comedian called Michael Jr. You can go on YouTube and watch his stuff. And he's really good. And he was raised in church, kind of, but he didn't really get it. And then he was at a comedy club doing a show, and a hot girl invited him to church, and that's what got him to church. And so he decided, and they were like, "Are you going to become a Christian? Are you going to become a Christian?" He said, "Well, I need to read the material first." And so he picked up a Bible. He said, "First of all, I didn't know it would be that big." He said, so then he gets to the Old Testament. He thought, this is really weird, and he didn't understand it. Then he got to, it's a true story. He goes, I get to Matthew, I read it, and it's like, and they killed Jesus. And I go on to the Gospel of Mark. They killed him again. I get to John, they've killed this guy 4 times. Yeah, and so he had no idea. He's not picking up that this is just 4 different, views of the same thing going on. He thinks they're telling a different story over and over again. One of the things you got to realize when you read through the Gospels is each one of them really are a sermon. And they're a sermon focused on different people. Matthew, in all likelihood, was writing to Jewish Christians who had been kicked out of the synagogue, who were no longer welcome to go worship, with the other Jews and so forth, and basically saying, oh, what do we do now? And that's kind of who Matthew is writing to. Mark is pretty much Peter's kind of stock sermon that he had, kind of his evangelistic sermon. Luke is written to a Gentile, especially to Gentiles who were completely confused by Christianity. If you were a non-Jew and you heard, that you were to come to faith in the Jewish Messiah, you thought, don't you have to be born Jewish? What's this all about? And what Luke is arguing in Luke Acts is, no, this faith was always designed for everyone. You go back into Isaiah, you look at Isaiah 42, 45, so forth. And it says in the book of Isaiah, that the reason God chose Israel was to reach out to the rest of the world. That was their job. And so what Luke is arguing in Luke Acts is, this is the fulfillment of prophecy. This is it. God has always said he was going to do this. And then you get to John. John is written for people many generations later. The eyewitnesses have started to die. And John, and we're going to talk about this in a minute, includes a lot of stuff the other gospel writers didn't include for a very good reason. But first of all, let's start here. Why is it? One of the things atheists like to point out is, if you remember Matthew 2, you remember that what does Herod do when he finds out the Magi are not coming back to tell him where Jesus is? What does he do? He has all children 2 or 3 years or younger in Bethlehem killed. Now, one of the things atheists say is, why don't we find that anywhere else other than the Bible? Wouldn't that have been recorded? And the answer to that is probably no. And here's the answer. Bethlehem, as far as the Romans were concerned, was an insignificant small town located about 5 miles south of Jerusalem. It probably had a population of no more than 500, like Otway. You got it. Small and insignificant. And this was not out of character for Herod. Herod did this stuff all the time. In fact, he killed his own kids all the time. He watched one of them strangled in front of him because he thought he had pretensions on the throne, which led Caesar to say, heck, he thinks it's probably safer to be Herod's pig than Herod's son. I mean, Herod had people killed left and right. And so this was not out of character for Herod to pull something like this. And it's no big deal if others didn't take stock of this. In fact, you go back and you read any Roman historian, and they don't really pick up on this whole Christianity thing until about 20, 30 years after Jesus, and then they're completely confused by it. Rome did not know what to do with the Christians. But I've told you, one of the weird things that you run into, though, is they talk about, can you believe these Christians? These Christians, they take care of the poor. They go around, they pick up orphans, and they take them home and raise them as their own. And these Roman governors who are writing this to Caesar, Pliny the Younger and others, they're not praising them for that. They think that's crazy. They thought the best way to get rid of the poor is let them starve to death. They thought if you throw a baby out, that means they're not wanted. Who cares? Rome's overpopulated anyway. They were just absolutely flummoxed by Christians, and they really didn't know what to make of them. They didn't really take any note of them for a while. The earliest we have is in the 40s in Rome. Emperor Claudius kicks out all of the Jews out of Rome. Now, he did that because the Jews and Jewish Christians were arguing all the time, getting into all these arguments in the synagogue, screaming and yelling about Jesus. And so Claudius just finally said, get them out of here. And he kicks them all out. He didn't realize that they were Gentile Christians too. In fact, the reason you have the book of Romans is Paul is writing to a church that was founded by Jewish Christians. The Jewish Christians get kicked out. They come back 5 years later. The Gentile Christians have been running things for 5 years. Think there's going to be a little conflict of who's going to run things? That's what Paul's dealing with in the book of Romans. That's why he says, yeah, it's great to be a Jew, but guess what? You're all sinners, so what difference does it make?
So really, up until a certain point, everything that was going on that we read in the Bible was pretty insignificant to Rome.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, in retrospect, you look at it, changed the world.
Right.
But at the time, it doesn't.
Oh, yeah.
It's a blip on the radar.
Oh, absolutely. Nobody, it would not have been. I mean, look, in a town of 500, if 5 or 6 kids are killed, which has probably been what it had been, or maybe even less than that, I mean, even today, if that happened in a third world village, it may not even make your newspaper. Right. And it's certainly not going to raise any hackles in Rome. They could care less. That's Herod's deal, and we don't care about that place anyway. They send wheat and stuff our way, and other than that, we care less. Yeah, they thought of Israel as just a giant pain in the butt that they wish would disappear off the face of the earth, to be honest. So it's just not that surprised that happened. What about the census? There's cry over, Luke's inclusion of the census, and why in the world? Here's the first question I get. I got this week. Okay, you've got this census. And a lot of historians would like to say Luke got it wrong because Quirinius wasn't governor at that time, blah, 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 but we now know that may not actually be true. Luke probably got it right, and there were probably 2 censuses. There was an emperor. We know in Rome every 5 years they had a census. That was for the army. You want to know how many men you had for taxes and for the army. There were also provisional censuses for the same thing. So Herod would have a census. And so that's probably what's going on there. Why did Joseph take Mary with him? Why in the world are you going to put a pregnant woman on the back of probably a donkey? I know in the movies it's a camel, but it was probably a donkey. And take some poor pregnant woman, bumping along mile after mile on the back of a donkey up to a place, and then we have to stick her in the back. You know, it was not, by the way, it was not an inn. There were no Hampton Inns in Bethlehem and stuff. There were no inns. The Greek word we mistranslate in means there was no room in the bedrooms, which means they had to sleep basically in the living room. And so what about the animals? Because it wasn't a cave, it wasn't any of that kind of stuff. There would have been animals around, but in Palestine those days, you always brought your animals inside the house to eat, and also keep them from wild animals and all that kind of stuff, to protect them and so forth. And so you would have the living room. The living room would be elevated, and then you would have the animals down here and a trough separating them. Do they still do that in Germany? Well, I mean, it's just, and you think about it, it makes sense, right? I mean, if that's all you got. Oh, I didn't think about that. Yeah, see? And so that's what's going on, is essentially they said that they got there late. Sorry, the bedrooms are taken, but you can sleep out here. And then it's kind of weird that Mary goes ahead and has a baby. You don't see anyone else around. But childbirth back then was pretty nasty, and it happened all the time. Anyway, they didn't go to hospitals. It happened in the middle of the living room. That's just where it happened. In some parts of some third world countries like Otway, it still happens like that. It's just.
Would he have brought her for her protection?
Yes. Yeah, that's the answer, is he brought her for protection. Any woman pregnant in Israel that was not married was in much danger of losing her life as a woman would be under Sharia law in a country with Sharia law. Absolutely.
They weren't going back there for census.
Well, Joseph was, but the reason he takes Mary with him, some people have always questioned, well, why does he have to take Mary, especially when she's pregnant? The reason Joseph's taken Mary with him for the census is because to probably protect her life.
Twofold.
Mm-hmm. All right, is that clear?
And then the other part of that story, that Mary was estimated to be like 14 years old.
Yep. Oh, yeah, Mary would have been very young, even though that's roughly about when Jewish women were married. I mean, Jewish males were typically married off when they were about 15, 16, and Jewish women when they were about 13, 14. Of course, again, if you're lucky, you live to 40. And also, I talked about this last week. When do hormones start to kick in? 13 to 16. So when the Jews are saying, hey, look, we need to marry off Bubby over here by the time he's 16, that's so he's not bouncing off the tent, right? The walls of the tent. It's like, go get him a wife and go crazy. There's some, there's some wisdom there. All righty. What about the temptations of Jesus? Some people have looked at Matthew 4, 1 through 11, and they look at Luke 4, 1 through 13, and they say there's a difference there. In Matthew 4, it says Jesus is tempted to change stones into bread. Then he's taken to the top of the temple and offered uncontested rule of the world. But in Luke 4, Jesus is tempted to change stones into bread first, then said he'll be given uncontested authority, then taken to the top of the temple. Well, which one is it? Who got it right? Are Matthew and Luke disagreeing? Here's what happens. If you're not careful, you're going to miss one very significant word. And if you go to Matthew 4, see if you can catch it. See if you can see what the significant word there is. Anybody? Then Jesus was led up the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And after fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. Duh, Matt. And the tempter came and said to him, if you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread. But he answered, it is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. Then the devil took him to the holy city, set him on the pinnacle of the temple, and said to him, if you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you. And on the hands they will bear you up, lest your foot strike against a stone. Jesus said to him, again, it is written, you shall not put the Lord God to test. Verse 8. Notice the first word there. Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain. It happened more than once. It happened more than once. Jesus is being tempted over a 40-day period. The devil is constantly going to Jesus and saying, come on, turn stones into bread. Come on. Hey, come on, throw yourself off the temple. Let all of Israel see that you're the Son of God. Then everybody will come to faith, right? Come on, just worship me and I'll get out of your way. And he's doing this again and again. Matthew says, again he did it. So the order is correct. It's just that Luke and Matthew don't waste time going, and then on day 3, he did this and this again. And then on day 4, he tempted in this way and this way. And then on day 5, they're just compressing it. But the order is still correct because it happened again and again. Make sense?
Even the first 3 times he just nagged
For 40 days, yeah. Yeah. Okay. I told you we'd talk a little bit about the Gospel of John, which is one of the few Gospels that tells us specifically why it was written in John 21. It says, so that you may believe Jesus is the Christ, because I told you eyewitnesses are dying off. Some people have asked, hey, why is it that the Gospel of John is the only Gospel to include the raising of Lazarus? Why didn't Matthew, Mark, and Luke include the raising of Lazarus? Why does only John mention it? Now, it didn't take long in church history for somebody to notice this and bring up the answer. Anybody want to take a guess? Let me say again, when John was written, it was because the eyewitnesses had begun to die. Who is one of those eyewitnesses? Lazarus. Why would John wait till Lazarus was dead to write about his raising, his resurrection? Because Lazarus would die again. It doesn't say Lazarus was the firstborn of all creation like Christ. Only Christ is the one that was resurrected and wasn't going to die again. To protect Lazarus' life. Remember, the Jews persecuted the early church. Remember that? For a while, the leader of that whole persecution group was a guy named Saul, who later became Paul, going around killing Christians left and right. So it wasn't very long in church history for somebody to raise their hand and said, well, probably because Lazarus wasn't dead yet when Matthew, Mark, and Luke were written, and they didn't want to make Lazarus dead. And so John waited till Lazarus was dead to include the raising of Lazarus. Make sense? There's another thing you got to keep in mind when you're looking at Scripture, and especially the Gospels. Like I said, like in the temptation narratives and other places, there's compression. There's what some scholars call telescoping. It's sometimes what they will do is one of the Gospel writers, because they're preaching a sermon, they've got a reason for keeping it there. Sometimes they will take it out of order. Like in John, he's got the cleansing of the temple at the beginning of his gospel. The rest of them have it at the end. Now, in all likelihood, scholars are agreed it only happened once, because it's almost certainly what got Jesus killed. Because the cleansing of the temple was a claim to messiahship. And so John puts it at the beginning of his gospel because in the beginning of John's gospel, John's got this 1, 2, 3 punch where he's laying out who Jesus is. In the beginning was the Word. He's showing that Jesus was God. Then he goes and has a series of signs that show that he was the promised Messiah. And so John lines up all those signs first, and then he gets to the rest of the crucifixion, resurrection, that kind of stuff. And so he's preaching that. And so you get into this, and you'll see that sometimes what they'll do is they'll telescope. They'll only include the information they figure is best for their sermon and leave out other things. Whereas other gospel writers will include more. And so that's not a contradiction. A contradiction is, show you what a contradiction is. If somebody says that I was not talking to Stan before class started, and I say I was talking to Stan, well, you can't make those, that's a contradiction. One of them has to be true, one of them has to be false. Now let's say this. Let's say that I said, yesterday in Huntington, I ran into Stan in Georgia. Well, what if I ran into Stan and Georgie and George and Brenda, and I mentioned to you that I ran into Stan and Georgie? Am I contradicting myself? Am I lying? No. Okay, the gospel writers do this all the time. And sometimes it just confuses people. Let's look at one. Some of the people get confused about Matthew 8, 28 through 34. because it says that Jesus encountered 2 demon-possessed men. But then in Mark 5 and Luke 8, it only mentions 1. Well, this is what, again, you read if you go to carm.org. It said, a contradiction occurs only if one statement makes the other impossible. If Mark or Luke said that only 1 demoniac came to Jesus, why Matthew says that only 2 came out, that would be a contradiction. But if there are 2, there is certainly at least 1. So therefore, there is no contradictions. Make sense? And so you get confused by that kind of thing because what we tend to do is we tend to look at our Bible and we expect them to write the way modern historians write. The problem is ancient historians did not write like modern historians. They just didn't. If you read like Herodotus, the histories, it's going to be very different from like I just finished a book on Ulysses S. Grant. They're going to be written 2 very, very, very different ways. Does that make sense? But here's a tough one. Let's look at a toughie. Go to Matthew 10, 5 through 11, I believe. Come on, Bible app, work. All right, the sending out of the 12. These 12 Jesus sent out instructing them, go nowhere among the Gentiles and enter no town of the Samaritans, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And proclaim as you go, saying the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse lepers, cast out demons. You receive without paying, give without pay. Acquire no gold or silver or copper for your belts, no bag for your journey, or 2 tunics, or sandals, or staff, for the laborer deserves his food. But then, if you go to Mark chapter 5, I'm starting to think it is just quicker to have a real Bible with me than instead of a Bible app. You learn this the hard way. Mark 6, 8 through 11, I believe, is the sending out of the 12 there. Mm-hmm. Mark 6, 8 through 11, I think, yeah. Starting in verse 7. He called out the 12, began to send them out 2 by 2, and gave them authority over the unclean spirits. He charged them to take nothing for their journey except a staff. Did you notice that? What did Matthew say? It appears in Matthew says, take no staff, and Mark says, take staff. Well, which one is it? Well, here we go again. Who wants to learn some Greek? Oh, you can't wait, can you? I'm having to dig into my Greek because I start, hopefully, a PhD program in the fall in New Testament, which will either make me much smarter or an alcoholic, we'll see. The answer lies in the Greek. Matthew uses the Greek word ketome, which means acquire, while Mark and Luke use the word arrow for take. So Matthew records Jesus saying, don't acquire anything additional. In other words, go as you are. While Mark and Luke just say, don't even include that, they say just go as you are. So it's that whole thing of what do you include. And so in Matthew, what Matthew is emphasizing is when he's sending out the 12, he said, and don't take anything from anybody. They're going to try to give you stuff, give you tunics, give you sandals, give you whatever, say thanks, because that's what they did. You didn't have a lot of money, but you made goods, and so you'd give people goods and so forth. It's kind of it used to be that way even with doctors and preachers out in the country. Instead of getting tithes, you'd get chickens and eggs and all that kind of stuff. And so they would do this to the apostles. The apostles come along, they heal somebody, they say, oh, thank you, here, have a I make canes, here, take this cane. And she's saying, don't take it. Don't take anything except what you got. And just go and trust God. And so it's not a contradiction if you know what the Greek is saying, and you all are going to learn Greek because you're all going to be good Christians, right? No? Okay, that's what I thought. Yeah, most preachers don't even want to learn Greek, so I don't blame you. Greek that's one of the things, when I get to heaven, that's one of the first things I want to answer is, why? Well, first of all, I hate the people at the Tower of Babel more every day, You got all these languages you have to learn, Greek, Hebrew, Aramaic. It's like, couldn't it just, sometimes I wish the King James only people were right, and they really do. The Bible just came down in King James only, edition with in leather with a little, that's a little thing and the red thing and the red words and all that kind of stuff, and just like that in English, even 16th century English is better than trying to learn Greek and Hebrew. But anyway, that's one of the things that you do. And Bible translators are a weird group. Now, of course, there are people who sit around and study Greek, Hebrew, and Aramaic all the time, so they have no lives, and they're going to be a weird group anyway. But they're weird in the sense that they hate to change things. They hate to make radical changes especially from the King James order of things, because it tends to make people mad. And so they really are a real conservative bunch in the way they order things. Dad is old enough to remember, Dad's old enough to remember the founding of the nation, but anyway, it's Dad old enough to remember when the RSV came out after World War II, and people threw a hissy fit because they changed some words from the King James, and oh man, people got mad. And people actually accused the translators of being commies and all kinds of stuff, and it's just, it gets really weird. And so they're real slow to make those to get in and make sure that the English translation is clearer, is as clear as it should be, in my opinion. Like, I am a big fan of getting rid of church words. Tell me what non-Christian's going to pick up the Bible and read righteous, to be made righteous, and understand what in the world the Bible's talking about. When we hear righteous in our context, we think what? Self-righteous. Usually self-righteous, and that means jerk. And so why Bible translators do not do what the Greek is actually saying? Yes, that you can say righteous, but what it's saying is being made right with God. Now, why don't they just say that? Drives me nuts. Just state in the English, to be made right with God. That's it. Holy too. We use the word holy all the time. In our context, if you think holy rollers, you think weirdness, it strikes the non-religious person as just weird. Now, hagios can mean set apart, different. Why not just say that? Bible translators, please. Goodness sakes. Also, I hate the word, you've heard me say this before, I hate it when they call Jesus Lord. For most people, they don't even know what a Lord is, unless they're nerds that have watched Lord of the Rings a bunch of times, and they have no idea what a Lord is. In our context, the only thing that makes sense is king. Why don't we just say King Jesus? I have no idea. But anyway, I'll get off my soapbox. That's just, they do that, and it just drives me crazy. This whole thing in Matthew and Mark and Luke could easily be harmonized in your Bibles if they would just put in there. Jesus said, do not take an additional staff. Do not take, if they just clarify that in the Greek, it would solve so many issues, but I don't know why they do it. Anyway, another thing you need to keep in mind when you read through the Gospels is this. This is N.T. Wright's probably the best known New Testament scholar in the world right now. And N.T. Wright says, you need to understand something. Let's say that our guessing is right and that Jesus was 33 years old. If you go through the Gospels and you start to count up how many days of Jesus' life we have, how many do you think we got? Some estimate about 30. 30 days out of a 3-year ministry. The Gospel writers did not give us a lot. And N.T. Wright says, sometimes people look in the Gospels, they look at the Sermon on the Mount, or they look in Matthew, and then they look at Luke, and they say, why is Luke so much shorter? And N.T. Wright says, look, guys, Jesus was like any other preacher. You preach a sermon once, you're going to preach it 30 times. It wasn't like Jesus just pronounced the Sermon on the Mount once and, okay, I'm done with that, moving on to the next subject. The Sermon on the Mount probably was his stock sermon. He probably preached it all over Israel in several different ways. And so you're going to see this. You're going to see him saying things where it looks like it's contradicting, but in fact, he's probably just preaching a similar sermon in a different location. Because he's preaching all over Israel for 3 years. Make sense? All righty. Down here. A couple other things to keep in mind. all right, if you're a big fan of nativity scenes, you're about to get mad at me. None of them get it right. Nativity scenes, you see what? You've got the wise men, the shepherds, baby Jesus, in a small manger. Who are they feeding with that little manger anyway? I mean, it didn't look like that at all. First of all, the shepherds are the first one on the scene, and they come to visit Jesus. Why does Luke include the shepherds? And why doesn't Matthew include them? Again, remember who their audience is. They're preaching. And shepherds were the lowest of the low in Israel. Typically, they were considered unclean. To be a shepherd was the worst job that you could have in Israel. You were always considered unclean. It was considered a job for the unskilled, all that kind of stuff. To be a rock star in Israel, do you know what the highest job was? Show you how much things have changed. To be a rabbi. All Jewish mamas and daddies wanted their kids to be a rabbi. That was considered the best job in all of Israel. Worst, shepherd. And yet, who comes to visit Jesus? The shepherd, the lowest of the low. Why? Because if you read through Luke carefully, one of the things Luke is preaching is the outsiders, the only ones who got it anyway. The religious leaders from the very beginning wanted nothing to do with Jesus. Who did want something? Prostitutes, tax collectors, the unclean, the shepherds. They're the ones who recognized him as king. The rest of them is one of Luke's things he's preaching to these Gentiles is understand that, you know, God's chosen people, a lot of them had hardened their heart to the part where they wanted nothing to do with it anyway. And so that's why, whereas Matthew records the Magi because he was showing that, one of the things Matthew was doing is because the people he's preaching to are Jews being persecuted by the Jewish leadership. He said, understand the Jewish leadership understood there was a star in the sky, that's where, you know, the Savior is supposed to be born. Why don't they go? In fact, it says all Herod's house was troubled. Why are they troubled? The Savior has come. But the Jewish leadership, they don't go out there, do they? Who is it? It's a bunch of foreigners. And so Matthew is saying, hey guys, the people coming down at you with the sword, they didn't get it from the beginning. And that's why he includes that. Now, to get back to the nativity scene, when do the Magi show up? Jesus is walking around now. And so he's no longer a baby, he's an infant. And Joseph now is no longer having to bum a couch off somebody. He's got his own place. This is much, much later. I pointed this out to somebody once. They looked at the nativity scene, they looked back at me, what I was saying, they looked at the nativity scene, looked back at me, and they finally looked at me and said, shut up. I like it the way it is. Some other things that tend to confuse people. Why is it, if you know, we used to, churches don't do it so much anymore, but some of you remember when churches always had Palm Sunday, right? Palm Sunday is celebrating what? What's that pointing to in the Gospels? Jesus riding into the city, and they're greeting him with palms. Do anybody know why they greeted him with palms? Because here's what's going on. I remember being a new Christian reading this and going, okay, everybody's excited Jesus is coming. I don't get what the palms are about. But then just a few days later, they're yelling, crucify him, crucify him, crucify him. Like, man, what did he do to tick them off so quick? They love him one moment, they hate him the next. Here's where knowing a little history helps. The palm branches were not something we tend to look at, oh, isn't that nice, isn't that sweet? It was actually a military symbol. The Jews had revolted against the Greeks. Now remember that the Jews had a long history of being enslaved by different kingdoms. The Babylonians, all kinds of stuff. Then you have the Persians, then you've got Alexander the Great come along, and the Greek empires. Alexander dies, his 4 generals kind of chop up the Greek world. And then after that, of course, later on, you get the Romans. But in between the Greeks and the Romans, Israel was independent. They had won their independence. And when the Maccabees, which I think I heard Mel Gibson's making a movie about the Maccabees right now, the Maccabean Revolt. The Maccabee Revolt is still celebrated in Judaism today. Hanukkah. That's what they're celebrating, the Maccabean Revolt. Israel revolted against the Greeks. They beat them, and then to taunt them as their armies were leaving, they would take palm branches and wave at them. Kind of their way of like the big fuzzy finger, number one, you take to a ball game or something like that. And they would sit there and they would wave it. It became a military symbol for independence and messiahship. So they're welcoming Jesus. They think he's coming as what? A military Messiah. All right, Jesus is coming. We've been hearing all about this Jesus who can raise the dead, throws out demons. Now he's going to come and whip some Roman butt. And he shows up and is arrested. And so what are they thinking? Another pretender to the throne. Crucifying. Because there were messiahs there. There were people claiming to be Messiah left and right. Everybody wanted to be the Messiah. Everybody wanted to be the next David. The problem was they kept getting their butts kicked. They kept getting arrested and crucified. And here is something that I like to gig my atheist friends with all the time, because they don't really know Palestinian history. How many Bar Kokhbites do you know? How many Bar Kokhbites do you know? How many followers of Bar Kokhba do you know? He was proclaimed Messiah by the Jewish leadership, led a revolt against Rome. They even had coins minted with his name on it. Year 1, the beginning of the new age of the Messiah. Romans killed him. And he stayed dead. The difference between Jesus' Messiahship and all these others who claim Messiah is, he's the only one who didn't stay dead. He came back. That's why you have Christians and not Bar Kokhbites today. But there were all kinds of people claiming to be messiahs, and they got smacked down. And so when Jesus gets arrested, that's what's going on. All right, one final thing here. How did Judas Iscariot die? Matthew 27, 3-8 says Judas hung himself. But Acts 1, 16 through 19 states he fell and his guts burst open. Which is correct? Both. Well, how did he fall? Could have been the tree break, but there's something else we need to remember. What happened when Jesus was crucified? Because Judas kills himself before the crucifixion, if we're reading chronology correctly. Earthquake. Earthquake will tend to knock a body off tree. Right? And so that's what's going on there. For some people, that I don't know why, but that's always confused people, but it's a pretty simple explanation. There's no contradiction there. Now, there's some other things I'm going to skip over. Next week, we're going to wrap this up by going into some things that really confuse people in Paul's letters. Some of the other, like, what in the world is Paul talking about when he's talking about baptism of the dead? And a lot of people get really either geeked or confused when Paul uses the term predestination. What in the world is Paul talking about? And then people get really confused when they get to the book of Revelation. And so we'll look at all that stuff next week. If you have any specific questions, let me know. It'll be our last class on this topic, and then we'll take a little break, and then we'll have another class after that. But I've got to go. There's some time I'm going to be traveling. I've got to go down to Virginia 1st of March for a weekend, so we'll just have to kind of rearrange classes around that. All righty? All righty, God bless you guys. Go get some more coffee and sugar. We're all about health before we worship here, so see you guys next week.
Christ Community meets on Saturday at 5 p.m. and Sunday at 10:30 a.m. For more information, visit www.christcommunity.net or check out our Facebook page.